Okay, let's get to the next segment. This was set the internet on fire, specifically Twitter yesterday. The big headline news, Jack Dorsey is leaving Twitter. So let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. He wrote a very long goodbye email. I'm not gonna read it all to you. It's basically, after 16 years of having a role and a co-founder, CEO, etc. of this company, I have decided it's finally time for me to leave. What he gets to, and the most important part, is he says that he will appoint a new CEO whose name is Parag Agarwal. So a lot of questions are currently arising. What does Parag Agarwal believe about Twitter? Who is Parag Agarwal? Okay, so let's get a little bit into his background. Parag, he started as an engineer at the company. He's a longtime fixture within the engineering community of Silicon Valley. From what I have heard, he's actually pretty well liked, once again, within the engineering community. And he was a CTO of Twitter, the Chief Technology Officer. Here's the problem, though. Parag is an engineering type who is now the CEO of a company who doesn't really have engineering problems. This company's problem is that they have big socio-meta-political questions to answer. What does free speech mean? What does should we amplify this or not? Our business model says one thing, our politics say another, democracy is another thing. All of elites are on our platform. Regulating this public sphere is really difficult. To do that, you actually need to have some principles. Now, here's the thing about Jack Dorsey. I'm not gonna say the guy was the best CEO in the world, but at the very least, and I'm saying this on a personal level, he was actually kind of committed to free speech. As in, look, I get it. He banned Trump from the platform, New York Post, all of that. If anything, his crime is being negligent and only running the company for 10% of his time while he was co-CEO of Square. That being said, and this isn't just me, Glenn Greenwald and others who have been in dialogue with him, he personally was committed to free speech, very big believer in Bitcoin and decentralization and the inability of someone like himself in order to run the public square, launching Blue Sky, which was an alternative which would have been decentralized and all of that and not would have allowed deplatforming. What I'm saying is he was not perfect, and the company that he built ultimately did become a very censorious place, but that he himself at least did not abide by that. This new guy is actually way worse and is much more of a reflection of exactly that censorious lean behind the Twitter staff. And this is an interview that he gave just last year after the election. And I also want to say this, pre-January 6th, that's why it's so important, pre-January 6th, in how Parag Agarwal, the new CEO, was talking as recently about the way that they would be regulating content. So let's put this up there on the screen. It was an interview with MIT Technology Review. Quote, "Our role is not to be bound by the First Amendment, okay? But our role is to serve a healthy public conversation. And our moves are reflective of things that we believe lead to a healthier public conversation." Now, that should scare the hell out of you. Why? Because he is explicitly casting aside the First Amendment in favor of what he and the team at Twitter decides is a healthy public conversation. Now, as we found out, this team does not believe that the Hunter Biden laptop story at the time would have added to a, quote, healthy public conversation. And whenever you say things like, we're not bound by First Amendment, you're also explicitly saying we're not bound by freedom of the press. We are not bound by the ability for people to express themselves and have a healthy debate within a public sphere. Instead, Krystal, what they are pointing to is that we don't really believe in being bound by this arcane idea. They are almost imbuing themselves, he specifically, with godlike powers and saying, no, it's our job to create a healthy public conversation. And by doing that, they're going to pick and choose what gets amplified, what gets not, what gets censored, what doesn't. And I would point out that Agarwal himself has, he's had some problematic tweets that he's had in the past. And,
really?
Oh yeah. It's actually kind of hilarious because he didn't go and scrub all of his tweets, which it's like, dude, did you not know that you were going to be the CEO of Twitter? I mean, I'm assuming that was going to be one that you were going to go ahead and look to.
That's fun.
And yeah, so he didn't go ahead and scrub all of his tweets. In 2010, he tweeted, quote, "If they're not going to make a distinction between Muslims and extremists, then why should I distinguish between white people and racists?" Which, a little bit of a problem.
Face.
Now, I'll give you I'll give you the context, because he claims this is the context. He was quoting Asif Manvi from The Daily Show. Look, I mean, you
Is this
CEO
a
of
healthy
Twitter.
conversation?
Is that a healthy conversation? Is that a healthy public square? Look.
The other thing that's funny is this interview was actually a very good interview.
Yeah,
because they
actually
ask
was.
him a lot of really salient questions.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is they push him on, well, okay, what are your metrics for a healthy conversation?
Exactly.
Like, give me some specifics here about what are you looking for? What are the metrics? How are you going to deal with it? What are your strategies? And it's just all this fuzzy, amorphous Silicon Valley speak that ultimately means nothing. And he goes on, after he says that thing about our role is not to be bound by the First Amendment, he said, the kinds of things that we do about this is focus less on thinking about free speech, but thinking about how the times have changed. One of the changes today that we see is speech is easy on the internet. Most people can speak. Where our role is particularly emphasized is who can be heard. The scarce commodity today is attention. There's a lot of content out there, a lot of tweets out there. Not all of it gets attention. So subset of it gets attention. And so increasingly our role is moving towards how we recommend content. And that sort of is a struggle that we're working through in terms of how we make sure these recommendation systems that we're building, how we direct people's attention is leading to a healthy public conversation that is most participatory. So if you unpack that, what he's saying is, look, first of all, First Amendment, whatever, times have changed, right?
Yes.
And so what we're focused on is what gets heard. So that gives you a little bit of insight into what some of their strategies probably already are and will be going forward, which is rather than just blanket, like sort of, censorship or banning or pushing off the platform, which they may do, they'll do some of as well. It's more suppressing. It's a little more under the radar. So making sure that the things that actually get promoted and are likely to show up in your feed are the things that they deem to be healthy conversation.
Yeah, shadow banning.
Which is, again, why, at the very least, these companies should be forced to disclose what their algorithms are, what their procedures are, because otherwise, you're flying blind. You may feel like, I don't think people are seeing this tweet. I don't feel like people are able to search for my content and see what I'm doing here, and not just on Twitter, but YouTube and everywhere else.
Yes, which we deal with all the time.
We deal with all the time, where you feel like you're going crazy because you're like, there's something going on here, but you can never prove it because all of this stuff is completely opaque. You can never learn what's actually going on behind the scenes. And so I think what this really points to is we have got to know how they are making these godlike decisions about what a healthy conversation is and what isn't. And obviously they don't feel bound, quote, our role is not to be bound by the First Amendment. Okay, so what are you bound by and how exactly are you making those determinations?
What you're bound by is the mob of your employees, which they have caved to over and over again. And Jack, I mean, in some limited instances, like I'm saying, was pushing back. In this case, I don't expect that at all. Look, I have talked to some of these Silicon Valley engineering types. In my general opinion, these people don't have a damn clue, okay? They have no idea because they engineered this amazing technology, but they are not equipped to understand the socio-political implications of the technology itself. I don't think Twitter has an engineering problem. I don't think they have even a product problem. Yes, they need to add like a subscription product. Okay, that's easy, and they're gonna print billions of dollars. What they have to decide is, how do we talk on the internet? What gets amplified? What gets not? Should we abide by a consistent standard, or should we have it so that our employees are gonna revolt against this, revolt against that? How do you actually have a standard on which you can apply so that everybody buys into those rules? As you said, at least be required to publish what those moderation standards are. Right now, it's up to Mr. Agarwal. And Mr. Agarwal has told us specifically, I do not want to abide by the First Amendment in my content decisions. And, a lot of people who observe the want of free speech, of a First Amendment type environment on the internet, you should be very disappointed, I think, by this choice today. I think it's a tremendous failure on the part of Twitter, their board of directors, and all of that. And I think it's going to be a disaster in 2023 when Trump is running again, or when we have an election cycle. Hunter Biden laptop, it's going to be times 20, in my opinion.
And Twitter occupies a very unique space in the information ecosystem. It's, disproportionately where elites are.
100%.
I mean, this is where every journalist
look at our
on
show, right? Like, how
Twitter.
many of it are tweets?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So it's very, very elite driven, which makes it disproportionately impactful.
Yes.
So who's running the ship there and what sorts of decisions they are making have just, massive consequences for what ultimately ends up being seen and heard and the type of discourse we're able to have.
Oh, absolutely.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.